A colossal ship, longer than the Titanic, disappears in the middle of the Pacific without a trace. No distress signal, no wreckage, no explanation. What would you do if someone you loved was on board and simply vanished? This isn't a made-up story. It's what happened to the MV Derbyshire, the largest British ship ever lost at sea. It left port carrying 150,000 tons of ore and an experienced crew. The destination was Japan, but it never arrived. The most shocking part, it took 6 days before anyone even noticed it was missing. 6 days of silence, while one of the greatest unsolved maritime mysteries in history was unfolding. What you're about to see is more than just a disappearance. It's an expose, a real-life tragedy, and a warning the world ignored for far too long. Imagine a giant of the seas departing from Canada, its holds packed with 150,000 tons of iron ore. The MV Derbyshire, one of the largest cargo ships of its time, set sail quietly toward Japan. But this vessel was more than just a freighter. It was a symbol of strength, progress, and maritime efficiency. And yet, like every good story, not everything that glitters is reinforced steel. For 8 weeks, the ship cut through the Atlantic with the confidence of a veteran. It glided past the southern tip of Africa as if it knew the way by heart, then crossed the vast Indian Ocean like an iron arrow. Every nautical mile brought it closer to its destination, but also, unbeknownst to anyone, closer to something much darker. What seemed like just another routine voyage would soon be etched in history as one of the greatest unsolved maritime mysteries ever recorded. Sailing isn't just about following a route, it's about confronting the sea and all its moods, like venturing through a forest filled with hidden paths. The MV Derbyshire understood this well. It had weathered storms, turbulent waters, and exhausting distances. But what few realized was that this ship was carrying more than just ore. Hidden in its steel framework was the seed of a future cargo ship disaster no one had seen coming. To the outside world, it was simply a titan crossing oceans. But beneath that imposing frame lay technical decisions, commercial pressures, and silent expectations that shape everyday life at sea. The journey appeared straightforward, but when a mysterious shipwreck makes its way into history, it's a clear sign that much more is lurking beneath the surface. And it was precisely when the calm gave way to the warning signs of a storm that the story took a dramatic turn. The sea has its whims and the skies their warnings. When Typhoon Orchid began to form, it was little more than a rumor on the radar, a whisper on the horizon. But as it gained strength, it grew like a beast awakened and ravenous. Winds intensified, clouds thickened, and the Derbyshire's path began to dangerously intersect with the unexpected. Captain Underhill, a seasoned man with dozens of crossings to his name, believed he could outmaneuver the storm. It wasn't arrogance, it was trust in the ship, in his crew, and in himself. Like a driver who knows every bend in the road, he plotted maneuvers, adjusted the course, and tried to make the Derbyshire dance with the monster without being devoured by it. It was a clash of titans. On one side, the ocean wielding a typhoon. On the other, a steel giant relying on its resilience. But here's what many fail to realize: at sea, small decisions become fate. In trying to stabilize the ship, Underhill ordered changes to speed and trim, confronting waves towering over 50 feet high. Picture trying to balance a 984-foot skyscraper on a flying carpet in the middle of a tornado. That's the kind of setting where an ocean ship tragedy begins to unfold, even when everything still seems under control. Nature, as we know, has a long memory and a merciless grip. And while the captain fought to tame the storm approaching fast, no one on board imagined that this might be their final challenge. Because disasters don't arrive with flashing signs, they come quietly. And it was in that very silence that the true mystery began to take shape. On September 9, 1980, the MV Derbyshire made its final radio transmission. After that, complete silence, no distress call, no coded message, nothing at all. As if the ship had vanished into thin air over the vast Pacific Ocean. That's the moment when the unsolved maritime mystery truly began to take shape. Have you ever stopped to consider what it means for a ship nearly 1,000 feet long to disappear without a trace? In an era already dominated by satellite communication, a vanishing like this feels more like science fiction than reality. But out there, in the endless blue, the Derbyshire vanished, along with its 44 crew members and all its cargo. A cargo ship disaster that didn't even cry for help before sinking. The most disturbing part, the ship's owners waited 6 whole days before reporting it missing. 6 days when no one was searching, no one was raising alarms, no one was investigating. It's like losing an airplane and only noticing nearly a week later. For the families of the crew, it felt like negligence, and maybe it was. The initial search efforts were like trying to find a needle in 1,000 oceans. No debris, no oil slick, no drifting lifeboats. The ship hadn't just sunk, it had been swallowed, as if it had never existed. And as time dragged on and the questions piled up, a new kind of pain emerged. The fear that no one would ever care enough to uncover what truly happened. The MV Derbyshire wasn't just any ship. At nearly 1,000 feet long, it was even larger than the legendary Titanic, a true floating fortress. It belonged to the Oboe class, designed to carry ore, oil, and grain, making it highly versatile. Modern, fast, and multi-purpose, it represented the peak of naval engineering at the time. But here's a detail few noticed in time. The Derbyshire was part of a series of ships known as the Bridge class, and that lineage was already showing troubling signs. Cracks in the hull, structural weaknesses, and design modifications had started appearing in technical reports. Yet many of those warnings were brushed off as red tape. A vessel of that size must withstand everything: waves, wind, internal and external pressures, while remaining balanced under the weight of more than 150,000 tons of cargo. On paper, everything looked flawless, but in practice, slight design deviations and untested materials were creating invisible fractures. The kind of flaw that only reveals itself when it's already too late. And the most curious or tragic part is that even with clear signs of trouble in its sister ships, the Derbyshire was still considered safe. After all, it had never shown any major defects. The problem is, when dealing with a mysterious shipwreck, the real danger often lies hidden in that dangerous sense of overconfidence. While the authorities seemed eager to turn the page, some families refused to accept silence as an answer. Peter Ridyard, father of one of the crew members and a naval inspector himself, was among the first to question the official story. To him, this wasn't just a tragedy, it was a cargo ship disaster that needed to be exposed for what it truly was. And when someone moves with a heart full of purpose, not even the ocean can silence the truth. Ridyard launched his own investigation, and what he uncovered wasn't just alarming, it was eye-opening. He realized that every ship in the same class as the Derbyshire showed signs of structural cracking. These were not minor issues. In a storm as violent as Typhoon Orchid, such flaws could be fatal. It was a clear pattern, ignored by those who should have acted long before the sea came to collect its price. Even worse, changes had been made to the original ship design without proper testing under real-world conditions. In other words, vessels were being sent out to sea with hidden vulnerabilities, covered by layers of naval paint. Imagine buying a car with untested replacement brakes and only finding out on a downhill slope with no way back. That's the kind of danger hiding beneath the surface of the Derbyshire's mysterious shipwreck. Even with all these findings, the British government chose silence as a shield. Claims were dismissed, evidence ignored, and the grief of families treated like a statistic. But when the truth is swept under the rug, it doesn't disappear, it grows. And the bigger it gets, the more strength it gives to those who refuse to let a story like this sink into oblivion. Faced with official negligence, the families chose to unite and turn their pain into action. In 1984, the Derbyshire Families Association was born, a group that wasn't looking for revenge, but for truth and justice. They knew that this mysterious shipwreck wasn't just an isolated tragedy, it was part of something much bigger and deeply systemic. And when ordinary people organize with purpose, even giants begin to tremble. 2 years later, in 1986, fate added weight to everything they had been warning about. The Kowloon Bridge, another ship from the same class, split in half and sank off the coast of Ireland. This wasn't a coincidence, it was confirmation. What Ridyard had uncovered now had another body to prove it, another cargo ship disaster bearing the fingerprints of the same structural failure. The pressure grew, headlines began to appear, and at last, the British government relented. In 1989, a new investigation was launched. But as if it were some kind of cruel joke, they once again ignored critical evidence. It was like calling a doctor after the fever had broken, only to refuse the diagnosis. The family's frustration turned into outrage, and rightfully so. But they didn't give up. They kept knocking on doors, attending hearings, and seeking technical support. They weren't just fighting for answers, they were fighting for every other ship still sailing the seas with the same hidden risks. And while time passed and their efforts seemed to go unnoticed, a new chapter was about to begin, this time rising from the bottom of the ocean. It wasn't until 1994 that the MV Derbyshire was finally found, resting nearly 2.5 miles deep in the Pacific Ocean. The wreck site was eerily silent, undisturbed, as if the sea had been guarding a secret for 14 years. The families had been right all along. The ship existed, and something terrible had happened there. The unsolved maritime mystery was, at last, becoming something that could be investigated. But finding the ship was only the beginning. It took another 6 years to piece together the puzzle that would explain what really caused that cargo ship disaster. And the conclusions shocked even the most skeptical. It wasn't just a design flaw or human error. What sank the Derbyshire was a brutal chain of events, triggered by the unforgiving force of the ocean acting on weak, vulnerable structures. The hatch ventilators, exposed during the storm, were ripped away by towering waves. Water then flooded compartments that were supposed to be sealed. One by one, the hatches failed in a devastating domino effect, each collapse leading to the next, until the ship could no longer withstand the pressure. A terrifying example of how even the mightiest can be brought down when struck in the right places at the worst possible moment. This explanation changed everything. The Derbyshire wasn't destroyed in a single instant. It was taken down gradually by a predictable but overlooked sequence of failures. The image of the ship being consumed by a series of preventable collapses revealed the truth the families had been shouting for years. And now that the veil had been lifted, it was time to confront the impact of that revelation. The discovery of the MV Derbyshire and the findings from the investigation didn't just remain buried in reports, they sent shockwaves through the shipping industry. From that moment on, international regulations began to change, especially concerning the safety of cargo ships. Inspections became far more rigorous, both during construction and throughout a ship's operational life. It was as if the ocean had demanded a heavy price, but in return, delivered a lasting lesson. Ship design also saw major overhauls. The way hatches, cargo holds, and ventilation systems were built was completely rethought. The goal was simple but critical, too. The goal was simple but critical to ensure that no other cargo ship disaster would unfold the same way again. In other words, what began as a tragedy became a global benchmark for maritime safety. And the credit? Much of it belongs to the families, the very ones who were ignored, dismissed, and silenced for years. They didn't just uncover the truth, they changed the industry, saved future lives, and turned a mysterious shipwreck into a lasting legacy. It's the kind of story that proves that even in the middle of the ocean, human persistence can leave deeper marks than any anchor ever could. Even today, every new ship launched carries a piece of the Derbyshire story in its bolts and welds. But despite all the progress, one question still lingers in the docks, in courtrooms, and in the hearts of many. Was the Derbyshire an exception, or just the tip of the iceberg? The case of the MV Derbyshire wasn't an isolated incident. It was the reflection of a structural crisis. In the 1980s, it's estimated that over 200 cargo ships sank every year across the globe. That's right, hundreds of disappearances, explosions, and mid-ocean collapses, all met with silence. The industry accepted these losses as part of the operational cost. Safety protocols were inconsistent, inspections were rare, and design flaws were seldom investigated properly. Many ships sailed with hidden cracks, low-quality metal, and recycled blueprints. And when you added rough seas and violent storms to that equation, the outcome was predictable. In most cases, no serious investigations were ever launched. Families received a letter, a compensation check, and a silence that lasted forever. But the Derbyshire was different. It pulled back the curtain and exposed what was happening behind the scenes of the maritime industry. The ship became a symbol not just of a mysterious shipwreck, but of an entire system drifting without control. Today, looking back, it's hard not to wonder how many disasters could have been avoided with greater accountability. How many lives could have been saved with more transparency? These are the questions that lead us to understand the role of modern technology, a force that, fortunately, has begun to transform this dangerous reality. Finding the Derbyshire in 1994 was a turning point. And what made it even more remarkable was that, after years of uncertainty, new technology allowed the ship to be located in just 23 hours of operation. Side-scan sonar and remotely operated underwater vehicles opened a new chapter in maritime searches. Before that, the ocean floor was like a dark, impenetrable forest. Now, it had become a map lit up with possibilities. This breakthrough didn't just help in the Derbyshire case, it changed the game for all mysterious shipwrecks still unresolved. What once took decades of speculation can now be clarified in weeks, sometimes in days. It's like upgrading from a ham radio to a high-definition satellite. The difference is as stark as searching in total darkness versus using a state-of-the-art flashlight. Now imagine what that means for the families. It's not just about finding wreckage, it's about naming the silence, bringing peace to grief, and finally closing chapters that have been left open for years. Technology has become an ally of memory, justice, and prevention. And if you're someone who learns through real-world examples, look into the stories of the Era San Juan or the Titanic, both reopened thanks to modern tools. But despite all this progress, there's still something no technology can do on its own: capture the world's attention. A ship can be found in hours, but some stories still take a lifetime to be heard. How often do we come across stories like this without truly seeing what lies beneath? The MV Derbyshire didn't just sink into the ocean, it sank into negligence, indifference, and the world's rush to forget what's too inconvenient to remember. And that raises a troubling question: what else is being left behind in silence? This story is a powerful reminder that truth doesn't always rise to the surface on its own. Sometimes it has to be pulled from the depths, with persistence, courage, and the strength of those who refuse to accept the obvious. You may never step aboard a cargo ship, but you can decide what kind of information you're willing to sail with from now on. Choose what challenges you, what teaches you, what transforms you. And if you want to keep exploring stories most people ignore, stories that make you think, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and join me on this journey.